Hi, everyone. Chad Friesen with CDW here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Welcome to everyone that's joined us this morning. I put myself on video only for a brief few minutes here, and then you won't have to put up with my voice any longer after that. But thanks all for joining today. We're going to take you through today some really interesting solutions here, our particular solution from F5 and HashiCorp that I got really excited about probably about 3 or 4 months ago when some of those formalities came out from F5 and the HashiCorp. Specific just because there's actually some people even on the call today on the event today that uses HashiCorp and F5 extensively, and I just thought it was a really good fit for the territory here. So we want to take you through that today. We have F5 on the line, number of people from F5 on the line to take you through that. What I'll remind, just a few housekeeping items before we start, is there is a Q&A. Everyone is muted, but there is a Q&A box at the bottom right that we'd ask if you have any questions. Just throw those in there at the end of the event. We'll go back to those and we'll make sure we answer as many as possible and then get back to you if we can't answer them on the event call today. And as far as the gift cards are concerned as well, remind that yes, you will be getting your gift cards. We are not going to hold you hostage for them, and they will be going out after the event today. So that's something to look forward to as well. Other than that, I think that we're ready to go. Robert, I think you're controlling the slides, or whoever's controlling the slides. We'll go to the next one. So just a quick bit about CDW, just because, and this is something that's important that we do at really every event that we're doing in the last 6 months or so is that CW Canada. This is our mission statement. So obviously we are the leading IT solutions and services provider, integrating and managing technologies to help customers achieve outcomes. What does that mean? Basically a one-stop shop. So what we found, if we can even go to the next slide, and I'll talk a bit more about what that really means to us, is what IT solutions providers have kind of morphed into in the last, I'm going to say just personally 5 or 10 years. I've seen this for probably about 20, but really in the last 5 years or so is you've got your boutique shops and then you've got the CDWs of the world that really usually buy those boutique shops or start up their own boutique shops within their business. So you'll see a timeline. I'm not going to go through this whole thing because who really wants to do that? But specific one I'll point out here as an example of what I'm talking about is the top right there, kind of that area is the acquisition of Scalar decisions, which is where I came from. Chelsea's on the line as well from CW Canada here in Winnipeg, and we both came from the Scalar side. I've worked at Scalar in its current form for 2.5 years. Chelsea for about almost 2 years, I want to say. Chelsea, I think that's correct. So basically, yeah, the way that we've kind of continued to build our business at CDW is through finding the needs of our customers, including what we're talking about today from the F5 Hashi side, which gets a little complex, but is, in my opinion, really innovative. We're going to see a lot more of in the next, 10 to 12 months at a lot of our customers here in the prairies. One acquisition that's not on this list that I thought was really interesting in the last couple of weeks for us is a company called, which is out of the US. And they actually specialize in machine learning and data management and cloud specific DevOps solutions. So that's going to be further integrated into CDW. That further integrates in what we're talking about today with HashiCorp and with F5. So really good things coming, really good things already here, and looking forward to hearing more from the F5 team. Next slide. Good. So this is the CEW overall global look here quickly. We'll do this one, we'll do Canada, and then we're going to hop into the content, but very briefly, you can see the numbers. I'm not going to go through there because it sounds like, we're boasting, but it's really just credentializing ourselves that we certainly are involved in many different projects around enterprise data center solutions and cloud solutions and security solutions across the world. And we'll do the final slide if we can. And so here, specific to us here, so a lot of the reasoning for the acquisition of Scalar was twofold, really. One was the acquisition of Scalar for the bench and for the expertise level on various different solutions that we had internally at Scalar, and that's through cloud, through security, through data center, digital transformation. But also the second point was really to get more local involvement because CDW really didn't have that presence. So Scalar reached across Canada. You'll see them all here in this nice little picture that we have. Obviously, like I said, me and Chelsea are smack dab in the middle, as are most of you on the call in the Winnipeg area. Right now, our Winnipeg office is consisting of me and Chelsea in either our basements or our kitchen, which I think we're having a good time with so far. So But you can see the offices across Canada, and that includes having delivery resources in each location, varying degrees of those resources. And that includes on the F5 side, and I'll just finish with this, that basically on CW, and this mostly comes from the Scalar side as well, is F5's largest partner in Canada. So we've done F5 work for, it's getting on to 20 years now, F5 training and enterprise deployments and all that good stuff. So really looking forward to the content today. I'd like to introduce you to David Garrison, who's going to take us through the F5 and HashiCorp solutions that are offered up. And again, I'll remind everyone that the Q&A in the bottom right, please do use that. Don't be shy. And we'll get to that at the end of the session. David, I will pass it over to you to get started. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much. Hi, everyone. My name is David Garrison. I'm a solution architect with F5 Networks in the business development organization. And the business development organization is responsible for establishing and maintaining partnerships and driving integration similar to what you're going to see today. And today's webinar is about using F5 and HashiCorp Terraform and Consul together to accelerate the deployment and configuration of the big IPs through automation. I've been at F5 for 5 years now, and I was 21 years at my previous employer. The last 5 or so, I was what I guess today would be called NetOps. We were the network engineering team, and part of our responsibility was managing the fleet of big IPs. And you'll see some of the steps that maybe you go through and we went through at the time, and then how automation can help to streamline those processes. So a little bit about HashiCorp. This webinar, we're often presenting jointly with HashiCorp, and we have a really strong partnership with them, and you'll see that in a little bit. But they are all about automation, and they have a variety of different products. And 2 that we're going to be talking about today are Terraform, which is for infrastructure deployment, and then Consul, talking about service discovery, but they also have other products that fill other needs. And then this is about our partnership. It's a very strong partnership. We have integrations today with Terraform and Consul, and we're working to further that integration with more aspects of Consul, including the service mesh and terminating gateway, as well as the HashiCorp Vault, which is a secure storage mechanism. It's a really strong partnership, and what I'm going to be demonstrating to you, I want to emphasize, is a fully supported solution, both from the F5 side as well as the HashiCorp side. So we did a survey a couple of years ago, and this may be something that you've seen in your own organization, but many times it can take days or even weeks to deploy out a new application, get all the pieces in place. And as more companies are trying to drive to faster delivery cycles, we need to eliminate some of those tasks, making things simpler and more efficient. So you may see yourself in here, how you do things, and this is kind of just a flow of what happens maybe in a typical application deployment. The developer has an app, and then they need a server to run that app, so they open the ticket to the server administrators, and do you need a new ticket? And then the server admins stand up their server, and then they hand it off to the network admin team to configure the big IP with the appropriate configuration, and we keep going and going. So there's a number of steps along the way, and I think you'll see through this automation that we can streamline this process and eliminate a lot of the tickets that have to be opened and other groups that have to be involved. So some of the benefits of automation that organizations that participated in the survey cited, 71%, as you can see, reducing OpEx. That's huge. Eliminating manual processes, eliminating opening tickets and sending emails and all of that is reducing OpEx. And allowing people to do more productive work and letting the automation do the stuff in a simplified fashion. freeing people up to do more things, be able to deliver more value more quickly. And then scaling to meet demand, that's becoming increasingly more important, going to more agile types of application deployments. In some cases, companies may be deploying out multiple times a day, and they may have bursts in their needs. Maybe it's a holiday event or something. They want to be able to add additional capacity and then have that be added into the mix automatically and not having to make these manual changes. And then, of course, delivering value much quicker, the time to market is becoming increasingly important to customers. So some of the challenges are automation for a lot of people is still very new. They may have some idea of what automation is, but haven't really dove into automation yet. So that's a part of it, is having the necessary skills to be able to begin doing automation, and which leads to the second thing, integration of these tool sets. So that's the tricky part. Every vendor has their certain tool sets that are great at doing their automation for their applications. So that can be a challenge. And then resistance to change. It's along the lines of everything's working fine, why do we need to change? So if you haven't done automation yet, you can see that it seems like a bunch of extra steps, and there is work to do to lay the foundation. But once you've done that and laid that foundation, it can definitely help to accelerate and streamline processes. So we have what we call our automation tool chain, and I'm going to be stepping through and talking about what each of these pieces is. So part of it, we start with our on the right side, left side, excuse me, with our cloud templates, such as AWS's CloudFormation templates or Azure ARM templates. So this is vendor specific, cloud specific, but you can create these templates that can help you to deploy your big IP instances into the various different cloud providers. The next thing is what we call declarative onboarding. And this is a tool that helps you to bootstrap your big IP. Once it's on the network and can be connected to, declarative onboarding allows you to set your VLANs and your self IPs and to license the big IP, that initial configuration, that day zero, getting it up and going. And then we move on to the next piece, which is AS3, and AS3 stands for Applications Services Extension 3. It's not the third version of it, it's the third version of the architecture. And we're going to be drilling deeper into that, but it's our declarative API that we released just about 2 years ago. And it's a single payload JSON declaration that you submit to the big IP with the configuration that you want to have created on the big IP itself. And the last is our telemetry streaming, which is one of our newer offerings. And what this allows you to do is to emit metrics from the big IP to a variety of different endpoints, such as Splunk, Datadog, Kafka. There's about a dozen plus endpoints, and you can also create custom consumer endpoints, but it's a really great way to get the metrics off to do some analytics. So, as I mentioned, we're going to be covering two HashiCorp offerings today. First one is Terraform. And Terraform is really all about infrastructure. It's about creating infrastructure. And you'll see that what we did to actually deploy out the infrastructure to, in this case, AWS for the demo. But what it allows you to do is using a provider. So Terraform has the concept of a provider. Like we have our big IP provider. There's also an AWS provider that we're going to be, that is used through the demo. And there's other providers from other organizations, and a provider knows how to talk to whatever the thing is. Like an AWS provider knows how to talk with AWS API. The big IP provider knows how to talk big IP. So you have providers, and then what you have on top of that are resources, which are the things that can be configured by that provider, such as on the big IP, you can configure a virtual server, you can configure a pool. In AWS, you're able to configure a VPC and security groups and internet gateways and other AWS elements. So that's what Terraform is really designed for is doing that initial deployment, and you can do further updates, but it's really great at doing infrastructure deployments. And you'll see we're using these Terraform config files. You can then store that infrastructure as code in a repository. It can be versioned, it can be replayed. So it's really an excellent tool for doing that infrastructure deployment. So some of the benefits, as I mentioned, infrastructure as code. This is all about having, essentially you're having your infrastructure documented, if you will, as code. It's those configuration files that define the desired configuration. The other part is multi-cloud management. So cool thing about Terraform is that it can operate, it knows how to talk to different cloud environments, whether that's public cloud or private cloud or the combination of the two. So you can use a single tool to deploy out infrastructure to each of these different environments. And then self-service, using these predefined Terraform config files, you can replay them. You can use them over and over again to deploy out infrastructure into different environments, making simple changes for those different environments. The next thing is Consul, and Consul has a number of different aspects to it. And today we're going to be talking about the service registry and service discovery. I'll be going over that more during the demo, but Consul is a mechanism that allows you to register a service and then later discover where that service lives. And so service, we're just talking about an application that provides some value, whether that's an end user focused application or an app to app type of application, but with services. So you're able to register a service, and you can have multiple instances of that service, and then you later can discover those services to find out how to connect to them. And you'll see that during the demo. Moving on. So you'll see during the demo that we are using Consul service registry and service discovery to manage aspects of the big IP configuration. Again, streamlining that process, eliminating manual steps, and maintaining the agility that some of these more modern environments provide. And also in terms of the multi-cloud, Consul has this concept of a data center, and a data center has one or more servers. HashiCorp says 3 to 5 for high availability. And the other part that makes up a Consul data center are agents, which are, it's Consul acting as an agent running on a server that is monitoring one or more services that you then later are going to use discovery to find. And so you can have multiple data centers, could be all on premises, could be in different cloud environments, and their Consul can actually join the two together, or the however many you have, these different data centers can be joined together using a variety of techniques. So a little bit more about how it works. So this is on the Terraform side. The user is going to create these Terraform configuration files, and leveraging the big IP provider, which we'll look at in just a minute, and they're able to affect change on the big IP using the big IP provider and one or more Terraform resources on the big IP. And then with Consul, you first, as mentioned, you register a service, and you'll see during the demo, we're using Nginx as a web server. And so we've registered Nginx with Consul, so now it has awareness of it. And one of the things that Consul does is it starts doing health checks to make sure that the service is available. So we have a health check. You'll see that looking to see if Nginx is responding on port 80. And there's a number of different health check types. You can do HTTP health checks, you can do TCP health checks, and you can do scripted health checks. So no matter how it goes, you want to know when the service is available, and will only add healthy instances to the configuration. Okay, so I'm going to be stepping through the demo part of this, and a piece of this I've already deployed out, but I'll walk you through how we got there. I'll show you the Terraform config files for that. I did that initial deployment because it can take about 10 minutes or so for everything to spin up, and I wanted to make sure that everything was up and running for the demo. And then we'll look at the console health check configuration, and then the big IP config. I'll show you some AS3 declarations, and then we'll actually scale up the number of Nginx instances, and you'll see what happens on the big IP side of things with that. And give you an overview of the architecture. So this demo is running in AWS. It could run equally as well in Azure or GCP. In this case, we chose AWS. And so as a part of this deployment via Terraform, there's a VPC that's created, Virtual Private Cloud. And then within that, there's a big IP instance that is deployed out, a console server. So in production, again, you would have multiple console servers for high availability, and you would have multiple big IP instances for the same reason, but for the demo, we have a single of each one. And then also, there's a server that's been deployed out that then we install Nginx. And it's the same thing with Consul. These are both the Nginx and Consul are running on Ubuntu. And then a part of that Terraform deployment process, we actually run scripts to actually install Consul in agent mode on the Nginx server, and also Consul in server mode on the Consul where it says Consul instance right there. So let me switch gears and go to the demo portion. I need to stop sharing here. Okay, let's see here. I need to drop out of this. Okay, so this is, I'm going to be taking you through some tabs with information. This is related to the demo environment. So we have our big IP instance. You can see the user interface of the big IP. And this is the console server dashboard. And we'll be coming back to that. And then I have got the AWS dashboard up. And in particular, looking at the auto scale group. And I'll be using that later in the demo. Then I have a couple other browser tabs that I'll be coming back to. I want to start out by showing you in Microsoft VS Code. This is a code editor if you're not familiar with it. Great code editor, it's free, supports a lot of different languages. And what we're looking at is actually, let me take you over to here. So this webinar, the content of this webinar and the Terraform configurations and everything else that I use to build this environment is available to anybody from the HashiCorp GitHub website. And to use this, you can recreate this exact same thing that I'm going to be stepping through. You would clone this repo, and then you need to set a couple of variables. One is for the AWS key and secret key. And then there's a prefix that you would set, so things are tagged with a certain prefix, but you can clone this repo, and then we document what you have to do. It's very simple to get this up and running, and you'll see that as part of the demo. Okay, so back to here. Just wanted to show you that these directories here that we're looking at are the exact same directories as we're looking at over here. Okay, so this is a directory that contains several Terraform config files. The way that Terraform works is you run it from within a directory, and what it does is any files that end in .tf, it considers Terraform files, which they are, and it processes all these files. And so you can divide up your work so it makes more logical sense, but it all gets processed together. So as an example, looking at what we did for the part of the AWS environment, you can see that we're working with the VPC in AWS. And here on line 18, we're creating elastic IP address that we're calling F5. And here we're defining some security ingress ports. Like this allows port 22 TCP would typically be used for SSH, and you can define where it can be accessed from. The client IP address is where it can be accessed from, and so on. So you see this kind of thing, and it's really straightforward once you understand the format of that. And in a similar fashion, this Terraform configuration file is actually deploying out the big IP that's used as part of the demo. So this is referencing an AMI, an Amazon machine image, that is the big IP. And here we're specifying some instance information, how large it is, what we want the IP address of it to be, and some other things. So that's the way these Terraform config files work, is depending on what it is you're trying to do, there's typically going to be a provider that you're going to use, and then a resource that you're going to create. As an example here, we're creating an AWS instance. We're calling it Consul, sort of like the big IP, and we're specifying how large the machine is, an IP address, and some other things. So once you kind of get rolling with these config files, it's actually pretty straightforward to create these config files and have could be a complex infrastructure set laid out fairly simply. And this is an example of where we're doing the autoscale group for Nginx. So this is what is going to allow me to add capacity to the environment, and then we'll see the effect, what happens within Consul. We'll see it scale up at the same time. So this part is what I've already deployed. But there is one aspect that I haven't showed you. And actually, I want to show you one other thing before I leave here. Let's see, it's under scripts directory. So I'm losing at the moment. I will come back to that. There's something I'm not seeing. Apologies for that. Oh, here we go, scripts. So one of the things you can do with Terraform, besides having these key value pairs, you can also run scripts. You can have template files that get populated with information dynamically. But in this instance, in this particular shell script, one of the things we're doing is we're creating and registering the Nginx service. And that's actually this section of the code, starting here with service that I have highlighted. So this is an example of registering a service in Consul. And in this case, there are 3 different ways you can register a service. You can create a config file that you lay down on the Consul server and then reload it. You can use the HTTP API, and you can use the Consul CLI, the command line. So in this case, we're laying down a config file. And so for a service, you give it a name and you give it a port. And then this is the check section. This is what the Consul agent is going to be doing on a periodic basis to make sure that the service is alive. And so in this case, we're using a TCP check against localhost port 80, which is where the Nginx server is running and listening. And we're going to do it every 10 seconds. And if we don't get a response back within 1 second, we're going to mark that that particular service instance as being down. So that is the service registry. So we have our service registered. How can we make use of that service? That's the service discovery piece. And that's what I'm going to show you here. So this is another directory within the repo. And in this directory, we are going to be using the big IP provider from Terraform. Actually, we created it. It's a big IP provider for Terraform is the better way to say it. And real simple to use. You give it the IP address, which could be a host name of the big IP you want to configure, and then a username and password. And this is an example of a resource. So we have the big IP provider, and then we have a big IP resource. And in this case, the resource type is big IP AS3. That's our application services extension 3, our declarative API. And this resource type allows you to interact with the AS3 endpoint on the big IP to be able to submit a declaration, an AS3 declaration, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. Here's an example of referencing a file from the repo. So what we're saying is, this is the resource. This is the AS3 file that we want to submit to the big IP, and then we're going to give it a name. So what does that look like? So this is an example of an AS3 declaration. It's JSON formatted. You'll probably recognize some aspects of the big IP that are familiar. And it is a single payload that you submit to the big IP, and that payload has the declaration of what you want to have configured on the big IP. That's in contrast to an imperative API like our REST API, where you may need to make a series of calls to accomplish the same thing, make a call, check the return code, maybe go on to the next piece, and you're continuing to fire off these imperative commands, where this is a single payload. You describe what you want to have configured, you submit it to the big IP, and the AS3 declarative API figures out what to do. So stepping through this, starting at line 6, we have this concept of classes. There are different kinds of classes, and we start with class tenant. And a tenant maps to a big IP partition. So when you see the word tenant, think big IP partition. And if you aren't familiar with big IP partitions, when you first stand up a big IP, there is a single partition, and it's called common with a capital C. You can create additional partitions as you see fit. And partitions are essentially an administrative configuration boundary. So you can create a partition and apply RBAC policies in terms of who can do what within a partition. Maybe you only give read access to some, and maybe it's full access to others, or editor for security, those kinds of things. So it's a logical administrative boundary. And so in this case, you look on line 6 and you see it's class tenant. You need to go up a line to see what the name of the tenant is. In this case, it's Consul_SD for service discovery. You can call the partitions can be named whatever you want within the naming constraints. Again, can't start with certain letters or characters. And then we drop down to an application. So there's a tenant, and the tenant is you're gonna have one or more applications for a tenant. In this case, we have the one application, and we're using another template called HTTP, and that template sets certain default values and allows you to configure others. And there are different templates that allow you to configure even more or don't have certain default values. So depending on what you're wanting to accomplish, you may use different templates. And what we're describing is the virtual server, and we're saying, make the virtual server this IP address and listen on this port 8080. Next thing, typical with a big IP, you're gonna have a virtual server, you're gonna have a pool, and one or more pool members before you to do anything useful. And here we're defining the pool, and we're calling it web pool. And the actual definition of web pool is further down in the declaration. And you'll see this, not in this declaration, but in others, where it's that you have the name of something and you have the definition of that something elsewhere within the configuration. And in this case, we're setting persistence, and we're saying use one connect feature of big IP. So here's actually where the web pool is defined. So we name it there, and then this is the actual reference to it, and it's a class pool. And we're going to use the HTTP monitor. This is just going to be the default HTTP monitor. You can also reference any monitors that you've created, any of the default monitors, and there are actually ways that you can create monitors within your declaration itself. So a pool has one or more pool members, and so that's where we drop down on line 27 to the members. And this is where the magic happens. So if we weren't doing service discovery, we would otherwise be statically listing the pool members. So that would be the IP address and the port, IP address and port, IP address and port for each of the pool members. What we have with this is not only can AS3 configure the big IP, but it also has the ability to discover services running in Consul. That's exactly what's happening in this section right here. So we're gonna be making a connection on port 80, and we're going to use the Consul service discovery, and AS3 can also discover resources in AWS, Azure, and GCP. So if you were doing those discoveries, this would be a different mechanism instead of Consul. And we want to query the Consul server every 10 seconds. And then this is the endpoint. This is the Consul endpoint that we're going to be querying, which is the Consul server that was deployed out as part of that initial infrastructure. Okay, so as I said, I haven't done this Terraform run yet. So let me show you what the big IP looks like right now before I do anything. And we can see the partitions in the UI are in the upper right. And right now we only have the common partition. And that's going to change in just a minute. So I'm going to drop to an SSH session. And these are the same files that we were just looking at in VS Code. And the way it works with Terraform, first thing you do is you run Terraform init. And what init does is it traverses through the Terraform config files and looks for any providers that it needs to download. So we're using the big IP provider and it dynamically downloaded it, which is a nice feature. You don't have to like separately go and download it. So now that we've done that, it knows it's downloaded the providers, it understands that. The next step you run is Terraform plan. What the plan is going to do is it's going to figure out what needs to change. So the cool thing about Terraform is it's actually able to query the target system where you're going to be deploying this to see what its configuration is, and then figure out what changes need to be made. So in this case, everything is new. And so that's why you see these green pluses, meaning these are going to be added. If there was a delta, if there was a difference, if something needed to be removed, it would be a red minus is what you would see. And it tells us one to add. So the next thing we're going to do is run a Terraform apply, which actually then runs the scripts or the config files that we were just looking at. So I'm going to do a Terraform apply. It's going to query, again, to see what changes it needs to make. And then you do have to say yes, or you can also do -- auto approve on the apply command. So now what's happened is it's invoked the big IP provider. Big IP provider has logged into the big IP using the credentials, and then it invoked the AS3 resource, which deployed out that AS3 declaration that we just looked at to the big IP. So let's look to see what's changed on the big IP. I got to log in. Sorry about that. My timed out. So one of the things you get with Terraform is you get an output, and you create a config file that outputs the values that you want. So in this case, we're dynamically constructing the password. Actually, AWS is. We've told it how long it should be, but it dynamically constructed the password. So I'm just grabbing that from the output, paste it in here. Okay, back in business. Okay, so now let's go up to our partition. So in addition to common, we also now have the Consul SD partition. And you may recognize some of what you're seeing here. This service main, that was from the config file that we just looked at, the AS3 declaration. There's that IP address, and then the port. So it created the virtual server. That's awesome. Let's take a look to see what we have for pool. There's that pool, web_pool is what we called it. And we currently have one member. So we have an application that allows us to test this. And this is an output from this last run that I did that deployed out the AS3 declaration. So I'm going to copy that, get the URL, and I'm going to put it there. And I'll just set it to auto refresh. So real simple, just gives us the IP address of the server. Let's go look at our Consul service discovery dashboard. So it's telling us here that there are two registered services. One is called Consul, the other one is Nginx. And the Nginx one is what we want to focus on right now. And there is one instance of Nginx, and it's healthy, as well as the node that it's running on is healthy, and that's from the Consul agent. And this is the IP address That's reported on the big IP as well. This is a different format of it, but if we go back to big IP, that matches this 10.0.0.196. So I'm going to go ahead and scale this up. We only have one instance, and we got a shopping event. We want to add some capacity to handle the additional visitors that we have. I'm going to scale it up to 4. We're going from 1 to 4. So this is going to take a few minutes, but while that's scaling up in the background, so what's happening is there's going to be 3 more servers running Nginx that'll be provisioned in AWS, and each one of those will have a Consul agent, which will register with the Consul server. So while that's spinning up, I'm going to take you to the documentation for our big IP provider. So this is from Terraform. And this is where you'll find links to all the different Terraform providers. Go back to where we are. So you have the big IP provider, and I showed you an example of this. Real simple to use it. And then this is the resource that we used in the demo in particular. This is, again, for posting AS3 declarations to the big IP, but there are resources for doing all kinds of things. This is an example of referencing an external file to create an iRule. Here's another iRule resource. In this case, we're creating an iRule right there on the resource itself. There's pool, we're creating pools, but you can see that we have a wide variety of resources, and we continue to expand those resource types so that there's more and more that you can configure using Terraform. I encourage you to take a look at the big IP provider, and I think you'll find a lot of good stuff in there. Next, I'm going to talk about AS3, which is our application services extension 3, which is our declarative API. We had our first release, it was in spring of 2018, and every release we add additional elements of the big IP that you can configure. And we're on roughly a 6-week delivery time for that, so fairly rapid. And so we continue to enhance its capabilities. So here's an example of using an AS3 declaration that implements a traffic policy to route the traffic based on information in the header in this case. And so it starts out like the other one. This is where we're defining our tenant here. And then this is the virtual server section, similar to what we looked at. Our pool. In this case, this is an example of statically defining the pool members, whereas using AS3 of the Consul service discovery, this gets automatically populated. And then we have a traffic policy, which allows us to determine which pool to route traffic on based on a variety of information, layer 3 through layer 7. In this case, looking to see if the URI path contains example.com, and if so, we're going to forward it to a web pool. But we have many examples to help you get started. And once you get into understanding how to structure AS3, then it becomes a fairly straightforward process. And a lot of declarations, they may be similar that you can use to kind of as a template. But I encourage you to take a look, and we have a link in the slide deck for AS3, as well as some of the other things that we're taking a look at. And so there's really good documentation on AS3. Great way, single payload, easy to do. Let's take a look at what's happening in Consul. I'm gonna go back up a level. There are 2 services. Okay, so we started with 1 service, 1 instance, and we now have 4 with the newest 3, they haven't passed their health check yet. So it's possible that the server's up. We can see that from the node check. We're just waiting for everything else to finish spinning up. But what's happening is on the big IP side of things, AS3 is constantly running in the background, and every 10 seconds, it's querying the Consul server. Tell me what you got. Tell me what you know about Nginx. And what we're going to get back is an address and port. And there are multiple ways, as I mentioned, to actually discover services. you can use the HTTP API, the Consul CLI, as well as DNS. So when you create a service, it gets registered in DNS. And the format of it is service name.service.consul. And this is configurable. It can be something else. So it actually is returning 3 IP addresses. So I think DNS maybe is configured. There's actually 4, but it's returning 3, but it's not always the same 3. So we can do service discovery that way. Looks like they're almost all healthy. Let's take a look at the big IP. Go to the pool. And there are 3 healthy, and 1, the health monitor on the big IP, it's failing. Let's go to our application and see what's happening. See how the IP address of the server is changing because we're doing round robin load balancing for that. So we can see console, it's almost healthy. Nice thing about that too, one of the things you can do with console service checks is you can make dependent checks so that if application or service A requires service B, if service B fails, it'll mark service A down if you've got that configured, which is a nice thing when you've got multi-tier applications. So this one should get healthy in just a minute. And as you can imagine, if I scale down, it's going to happen as those servers are removed. And then when AS3 is doing its service discovery, those service checks would fail and so would be removed from the pool. I can go ahead and show you an example of that. This one should be healthy in just a minute. So let me get back to, let's do here, do that, get down. Okay, so while that's scaling down, I want to go back to the presentation and go back. This is what we started with, the multiple steps. And there's still steps, but we've automated a lot of them. And instead, we were able to do this by using Terraform to deploy out that initial infrastructure, including our big IP, the console server, as well as the Nginx server. And then AS3 was used to discover the services. So there was, the NetOps team didn't have to have a ticket open saying, please add these as pool members. And then we could potentially then be applying some policies or web application firewall policies or other big IP specific policies. And we wind up with a configured big IP, zero touch, repeatable process. So as I mentioned, there are some links. And I believe the slide deck, you'll have access to the slide deck, but it's links to pretty much everything that I talked about today. So I hope you see the value that automation provides, and with our strong partnership with HashiCorp, our integration with Consul and Terraform, we're expanding upon our integrations with HashiCorp, that we've been able to take something that would require a lot of steps and maybe manual processes and tickets or emails flying around, and we've simplified it, we've streamlined it, and we made it agile so you can deploy out very quickly and have those changes be reflected. And at this point, I'm going to pass it back to the CDW, and we're going to do some Q&A. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. Great job. We do have a couple of questions here that we can start with. I'm going to go to one that Robert just sent me here from one of the attendees. So apologies if I missed this. The demo was focused on VE in Azure. Is there much to modify to use this tooling on on-prem instances for, say, Viprion and ASM via VCMP? I'll let you answer that first. There's a follow-up question to that, David.
Sure. So yes, we showed things running in AWS, and I think there was a question about Azure, and you can do the same thing in Azure as well. And on premises, the AS3 piece is specific to the big IP, so it doesn't matter where the big IP is running, whether it's an appliance or a VE or a Viprion running VCMP. Those AS3 declarations can be deployed to any flavor of big IP, version 13.1, I believe, or higher. And also There is, as I mentioned, there is a Terraform provider. If you're in the vSphere environment, there's a Terraform provider for vSphere. So kind of what we did in AWS, you can do in vSphere as well. I hope that answers the question.
I guess we'll find out if it didn't, but I'll ask a follow-up question here. Just the follow-up question. So can we push ASM policies and config this way, or best to orchestrate that level beyond base deployment with something else like Ansible?
That is a good question. Actually, we have an example, if I can locate it, an AS3 example of using an ASM policy. Let me see it. Let me search for it. And it actually, no, it's not there. It actually allows you to do a couple things. Here we go. Maybe it's here. So there is a way that you can either reference an existing ASM policy like this. You can store it in a repo, and then you can reference that repo like we are doing here. So this link here is your repository where maybe you have a collection of ASM policies, maybe the security team has created, and you can reference them very simply as I'm showing here within an AS3 declaration. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And I think that just from what we've seen, I'll just speak CDW here, is the Ansible and HashiCorp solutions. I'm not going to speak specific to F5, but what I've seen from both just the HashiCorp and Ansible solutions, they do very often complement each other in this way. So yeah. I'm kind of feeling like the answer there is probably you can do it a few different ways based on your personal preference.
Yes, absolutely. Ansible, we think of more configuring day one plus. So Terraform for doing that initial infrastructure deployment. You can do more Terraform, but Ansible, I think, maybe better at doing some of the day one plus types of things. And you can actually deploy out AS3 declarations using Ansible as well. And we have a number of Ansible modules that are available, similar to like what we have for Terraform. We have created for Ansible modules.
Excellent. I've only got one more right now, so I'll encourage anyone else. We've got a few more minutes here, but I'll ask the next one and the last one I have here. Are any of your customers also utilizing Jenkins as part of their deployment pipeline? If so, any gotchas to be aware
of? I'm not aware of any customers that are using Jenkins, but I wouldn't be the person that would typically be talking to customers about that. But I know that Jenkins is a very popular CI/CD platform, so I'd be surprised if we don't have some customers using it.
Are you guys able to hear me?
Yeah, Sanjay, we do. I see you answered that too in the chat here. So, but you can verbalize that. That's fine.
Yeah. So hey guys, I'm with F5. Work with David here. We do, without naming the customers, there are I should say, like Sanjay's point, there are a lot of customers using it. It's a very popular tool of choice. If you could either work with CDW team or with an F5 account manager to see if there are any automation workshops coming up in your area. That's a good way to get yourself familiar with how to use these tools. These workshops typically go over best practices of CI/CD and F5 deployments using tools like Jenkins.
And one of the things that one of the things we're working on is enhancing what we're showing today with some workflows running in GitHub. So GitHub released, it went GA, I think it was November of last year, with their new workflows capability. So CI/CD within GitHub itself. So yes, you can absolutely use Terraform, Ansible, AS3 in those CI/CD environments, including Jenkins and GitHub and others.
That's all the questions we have here that I've got, at least in the Q&A. I'm hoping I didn't miss any that anyone else received. There's some on chat, some on Q&A, so we're covering a few bases here. But unless I see one in the next few minutes here, we'll just wrap this up just because we are getting to 11 o'clock local time here. So David, thanks very much. Excellent presentation. A lot to take in. I mean, I think that's probably a good summation of it. We probably are hitting the tip of the iceberg on some of this stuff, depending on the skill set and the investigations that everyone on the line that's attending has done. so far with not just F5 but even Hashi, and Ansible came up a couple of times. Obviously, Splunk came up with some of these pieces. Something that we talk about a lot. All those different technologies, how they work together for not just multi-cloud, but all kinds of other automation situations. So what I'll do is make sure everyone also knows is that the gift cards will be emailed to you later today. So that should get into your inbox fairly soon. And I don't see any more questions. So again, David, I want to thank you, and I want to thank the rest of the F5 team, and certainly all the attendees that could make it today in our nice virtual events that we have to do. Hopefully we'll do another one of these with the F5 and HashiCorp that's in person, maybe outside on a patio September, but we'll see. But again, thanks, David, and excellent job.
Yeah. And thanks everyone for attending. I really appreciate your time. Hopefully you saw some value in doing automation. If you aren't into automation yet, take some baby steps into it, and hopefully you'll find that it's not as difficult as you think. And I also want to we want to thank CDW for hosting this webinar.
Thanks, David. I'll add one quick thing before we all jump off. Is this would be really helpful for me, and I'm speaking just personally for me in Chelsea in the local Winnipeg area, is just to have some of your feedback from the customer side on something like this. We tend to, there tends to be a lot of events that either we or someone else will do that maybe are more traditional, sometimes just, hey, here's a new storage box or something like that. This is a little bit outside of that mainstream, and we want to try to be as bring as much value as possible to what is new and up and coming, and helping out specifically automation. So your feedback would be really excellent if Chelsea and I reach out to you personally, if you want to reach out to us, whatever works for you, but that would be really helpful for us going forward as well. With that, I will let everyone move on with their day. Thanks again, everybody, and hope you guys have the good rest of the week. Take care.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.